I didn't hear of bomb trains 2.5 years ago. I didn't know what they were. But I was at a energy conference in Albany, New York. And I grew up in Albany, and so I had an idea how, what the rail traffic was downtown. And you rarely saw anything on the rails downtown, which comes from the north and goes into the port of Albany. But I was down there and I saw all these strings of tanker cars lined up. And so I asked one of the local people who was attending the conference, I said, what the heck are these things? And he says they're full of back-end oil from North Dakota. What they do is they take it into the port of Albany and they transfer it from the oil tanker onto oil barges that run down the Hudson River to major refineries in the United States or coastal. So anyway, so the Bakken Formation is in North Dakota. There was no pipeline infrastructure in North Dakota to speak of. And then the fracking, this fracking technology came around and they started fracking like crazy up there, as well as in Pennsylvania and other places. So they searched around and said, how do we get this oil out of North Dakota? And the only thing there was the rail. So they immediately started shipping oil out on tankers. They're called DOT 111 tankers. These are the tankers that are used to ship milk, innocuous products. And they just said, well, we'll just ship oil in this. And they did that. They started roughly around 2008. And the traffic was gradually increasing, and what they did was they ship it out to the coastal regions, all three coastal regions, the Gulf, the East, and the West Coast. No one batted an eye at this whatsoever. It was all normal rail traffic until July of 2013, when an oil train rolled down a hill in Lake Megantic in Quebec, exploded downtown and killed about 47 people because of a brake failure. I interviewed the chief first responder in Lake Megantic last summer, who directed the firefighting efforts, and he said, no, we let it burn for 6 hours, and then we began to approach it, and then another levee up there. We almost lost some first responders because of that, so then we backed off for another 6 hours. I asked him about how he could apply foam. He said, well, we couldn't get close enough to apply foam. After 12 hours, they approached it, and then they started to apply foam to put it out, and they applied foam for another 15 hours. The fire burned in downtown Lake Megantic. It burned for roughly 35 hours. So after that, everybody was scratching their heads. The oil trains do not explode. That's the lesson all first responders were taught. This thing is labeled as 1267. That's a petroleum oil. And they said, that won't explode. It will burn, but it won't explode. So the Canadian government analyzed it, and they found all this gas, butane, propane, methane, embedded in the gas. And the gas company said, oh yes, well that comes out of the ground with the oil, and we just ship it along with the oil. So after that, they're called bomb trains. And the oil industry themselves came up with that terminology, not some raging environmental activist. So as I said, they risk to life, limb, and property. And what I've looked at in my research on this is that there are also the risk to aquifers, drinking water, and between any aquifer between here and North Dakota. And New York State is blessed with lots of aquifers. These trains don't come off the tracks. I mean, every train that goes through here has a 99.999% of making it through here, okay, as they do. So there's a low probability, but the problem is that once it occurs, there's lots of cascading consequences that last for generations. The low probability is offset by the huge consequences from one of these derailments. So basically, the entire groundwater structure in New York State, which underlies the railroad traffic, the CSX lines that run along the lake and through Buffalo and eastward, all that water is at risk. So it's a new phenomenon. As I said, it started in 2008. The Bakken of crude oil is explosive, unlike any other crude oil. Unlike pipelines, no prior approval, no environmental studies are needed, no FERC approval, no local say. Once you order your tanker to ship your oil, you can do it. You don't need the approvals from any governmental agency, local, state, or federal. So here's some take-home lessons. Once you pollute an aquifer or groundwater system, It's impossible to clean it up for human use, certainly on the order of longer than a lifetime. And the other thing I'm going to talk about, we did an analysis of bomb train counting through Buffalo, New York. We've been doing that for a year and a half now. From that analysis and from Governor Cuomo's efforts to inspect the rails, which I applaud him for doing, he publishes those results. And from that, 2 sources of data, we were able to calculate that about 100 critically defective crude oil carrying tanker cars travel through New York State annually, and annually 3,000 non-critically defective tankers carry oil, and they're traveling through New York State. These are the ones that we worry about, the 100 critically defective, the ones without any brakes, the ones with shoes that are out of round. So those are the ones that could cause a serious problem. So here are the routes for the Bakken oil train. As I said, here's North Dakota, where the Bakken formation is, travels towards the west, down towards San Francisco. Some of it goes down towards the Gulf Coast, and majority of it actually comes through Buffalo, New York. So what's the volume of coming out? The Petroleum Administration divides the country up into these pads called PADs, Petroleum Administration for Defense Districts, and it's coming out of North Dakota, which is in Pad 2. You can go online and figure out how much Pad 2 oil is being shipped to the other pads in the United States. And basically the blue line is Pad 2 to Pad 1. We're in Pad 1. So the blue line is the Bakken oil coming through Buffalo, New York, and through your reservation. And you can see that Pad 2 to Pad 1 East Coast shipments are roughly equivalent to the West Coast shipments. So half of it goes here, half of it goes there, and a small tiny fraction goes down through here by rail shipment, not by pipeline. So by rail, half of it goes here, half of it goes here, and the small smattering goes down through there. So here's the routes from New York State. They come into Ripley, along Lake Erie, Buffalo, Rochester, Syracuse, Rome, Utica, down into Schenectady. They bypass Albany, go through Selkirk, there's a huge rail yard, and then south, about 8 miles south of Albany, and for transloading it goes back up into Albany. There's 2 trains coming through here each day. Based on rail traffic, they sometimes ship it up into Canada and then back down within inches of beautiful Lake Champlain. But a whole train load of Bakken oil come down through there roughly 2 times a week. So the problem, so the New York State Attorney General Snyderman last December, a year ago, made a petition for rulemaking. He said, basically what this says, we have to degasify the oil so that it will not explode. That will take care of one part of the problem. So he says a rail tank car explosion or fire along New York State routes of the size and intensity of recent events, he's talking about Lake Legante, would imperil the safety and welfare of thousands of New York State residents who live, work, travel, and recreate along the way. In addition, explosions and release of large quantities of oil may threaten nearby property and infrastructure, as well as the environmental health of wetlands, rivers, drinking water resources, and wildlife habitats through which these trains travel. They recently respond to this, and they're beginning a rulemaking process, so get your pencils ready. You'll be able to comment on this pretty soon. Hydrocarbon pollution of groundwater is forever. For example, Leroy, New York, December 1970, and we're talking about hydrocarbons in water. Once any hydrocarbon gets into groundwater, it's there in your lifetime. December 6, 1970, there was a train coming along here. You can see where the tracks were. They subsequently pulled up the rail. But here, on that winter night in December, there were 2 tanker cars and 1 freight car derailed. The freight car was carrying cyanide crystals, and the tanker cars were carrying a combined volume of 30,000 gallons. And all that 30,000 gallons of an industrial solvent called trichloroethane. It's a very common solvent, it's still used today. The solvent leaked into the ground, the cyanide crystals are scooped up, they could handle that. So what's the state of it in 2008? The EPA and DEC are taking care of this site, and they're still spending millions of dollars today trying to clean it up. So here's the effect of 30,000 gallons, which is essentially 1 tanker car. So both those tanker cars were half filled, basically, at least. So 1 tanker car that you see is 30,000 gallons of Bakken oil. This is the result from 1 tanker car. From 1970, it broke open and derailed and got into the groundwater. And in 2008, 38 years later, almost 40 years later, they went around this huge area measured DEC. And this area here, I measured it, the outer green area, that's an area of 4 square miles. Okay, and you can see it's drifting eastward towards Mumford and Caledonia. Yeah, this is 10 parts per billion TEC, which is over, yeah, the EPA limit is 5 parts per billion for drinking water. So this is 10, this is 100, and this is 1,000, and this was 8 years ago. So where's this plume today? It's probably, just a little bit over this. It's probably into Mumford and Caledonia. The groundwater is shifting this way. Okay, so what's the groundwater situation? So all this white here is groundwater. There's a few aquifers that the green is, I think, 10 gallons per minute. This will, if you sink a well up here, it'll give you a good flow. The blue ones are 100 gallons per minute aquifers. So it's beginning to reach these aquifers. And the question is now, has it indeed reached these? And the EPC and EPA haven't studied it, or they haven't released the studies if they have. I hope they get to it at some point. I went there last year, and this is the picture of the derailment site. The derailment happened here. And what the DEC and the EPA did was trying a brand new way of getting at the trichloroethane that's still in that red area where it's 1,000 parts per billion. And what they're doing is recycling the soils through a system here which will capture the trichloroethane and then return the soils back into the ground. And I interviewed the DEC guy here in Buffalo, and he said, check back in a couple years, we'll tell you how it went. So it's a very, very, very slow process. I mean, the bottom line is, once it gets into the ground, it's a pain in the butt to clean up. So, if you can clean it up. And this is, I'm glad they're trying this. It's a good way to spend tax money. They need to figure this out. Because there's many other sites around the country would probably use it if it works. So I'm thankful that they're doing this. So here's the rail line, CSX rail line. Here's the yellow stippled area is a what's called DEC critical environmental area. It's an area where you have to be very careful about building structures, worry about the aquifer that lies under here. Why? Because this aquifer that underlies here is used by the citizens connected to New York and Niskayuna and points northward. So there's no force of law building structures over this. It notifies the public that you should think about not doing something here, but that hasn't been followed. And this is a critical environmental area that was established in the 35, 40 years ago. Okay, next. Yeah, actually here in 1985, the EPA administrator said regarding this, that's the Great Flax Aquifer in Schenectady, as a result of its highly permeable soil characteristics, the aquifer is susceptible to contamination through its recharge zone from a number of sources, including chemical spills, highway, urban runoff, septic systems, leaking, storage, underground storage, above ground tanks, landfill, leachate. Since groundwater contamination can be difficult or sometimes impossible to reverse, this is what I've been saying for the last 15 minutes, and since the aforementioned communities rely on Schenectady Niskayuna aquifer system for drinking water purposes, contamination of the aquifer would pose a significant health hazard. They knew this in 1985. So what are they doing now? They're running back and crude oil trains. This is over this area for 8 miles. And what happened in January 16th, 2016? There was a derailment, right? Essentially over the recharge area. And fortunately, it was lumber. Lumber's easy to clean up. But this could have been a bomb train. This should have been a wake-up call to the citizens of Schenectady. And the people in Albany have tried to alert the people of Schenectady about this situation, and it's fallen on deaf ears.